At Christmas dinner, my mother raised her wine glass and smiled. Then, in front of everyone, she said, "We've decided you are no longer part of this family." People laughed. My sister clapped, and I just sat there, quiet, until I slid a folder onto the table that made the room stop breathing. "Hi, I'm Lauren. I'm the daughter who once paid everyone's bills, baked every pie, and was still treated like a ghost at the family table. But that night, I didn't raise my voice. I brought receipts. And what happened next? Well, let's just say they'll think twice before crossing the one person who always stayed silent. Until now. Before we dive into the story, let me learn a bit about you. If you're a charming lady, please leave the number 1 in the comments. And if you're a dashing gentleman, leave the number 2. This way I can send you a special greeting. Now let's start the story together. I was folding towels in the kitchen when the text came in. Just 7 words. No greeting, no warmth. Just Christmas dinner. 6 p.m. Bring dessert if you want. I stared at the screen longer than I should have, letting the sentence sit there like a leftover I didn't want to touch. There wasn't a single emoji. No love, mom, no can't wait to see you. Just a time, a date, and an optional task. I let my thumb hover over the screen. A part of me, the smart part, said to ignore it. But another part, older, wearier, hopeful in spite of everything, told me to just reply. So I did. I'll be there. The towel stayed half folded on the counter while I sat down at the table, suddenly unsure what to do with my hands. Outside, the sky over Asheville had turned a soft, unfriendly gray. It wasn't snowing, but the chill had crept in through the window panes, settling in the corners of my apartment. The radiator rattled like it had something to say, but never finished the thought. I reached for the kettle. A cup of tea might not fix anything, but it would give me something to hold. Duke, my old golden retriever, rested his chin on my socked foot, offering the kind of quiet company only a dog could. He didn't care about the invitation. He didn't care that Christmas had started to feel like an annual audition. I always failed. He just sighed, long and low, and closed his eyes again. I should have known better. Every year it was the same. I poured myself into planning, decorating, baking, trying to make everything perfect, as if perfection would earn me something close to affection. And every year, I ended up at the edge of a crowd that didn't see me. Still, that stubborn hope crept in again, curling around my chest like a fog. Maybe this year would be different. Maybe they'd notice. On Christmas morning, I rolled out the dough for the pecan pie. It was my grandmother's recipe, thick, rich, with a hint of bourbon. I lined the crust with care, pressed the fork marks evenly, toasted the pecans in small batches. I even pulled out the old ceramic dish with the faded snowflake pattern. The one Mom always said looked classy without trying too hard. I wasn't sure if she meant me or the dish. By late afternoon, the pie was cool and wrapped in foil. I placed it in a bakery box, tied it with string, and tucked it into the passenger seat beside me. Duke stayed behind, watching me from the window like he knew something I didn't. Maybe he did. The sky was already dark when I pulled into my parents' neighborhood. The street was lined with cars, some half-parked on the lawn. Porch lights spilled gold onto the snow-dusted walkways, and laughter drifted through the air, muffled but unmistakable. Their front door stood open just a crack, no wreath, no welcome mat. I hesitated at the bottom step, one hand gripping the pie box, the other clenching around nothing. A cold breeze tugged at my coat. I climbed the stairs slowly. No one opened the door for me. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon and ham, like sugar cookies that had been in the oven a minute too long. The living room was full. Voices rising and overlapping, glasses clinking, a burst of laughter from the kitchen. I stepped inside, brushing snow off my boots, smoothing my hair out of instinct. No one turned around. I caught a glimpse of Mom, Margaret, in the dining room, arranging a tray of deviled eggs. She glanced up, gave a nod that barely qualified as acknowledgement, then turned back to her platter. Dad wasn't visible. Probably tucked into his chair, watching football, sipping something amber. I carried the pie to the kitchen. The counter was already crowded with pies and cheesecakes. I found a sliver of space near the edge and placed mine there, careful not to smudge the box. No one said thank you. No one even looked. Sophia's voice cut through the room, sharp and familiar. "You know," she said, a little too loud, "it's been so relaxing not having her micromanage everything this year." A few chuckles followed, light, polite, unbothered. I didn't look over. I didn't need to. I knew that tone. I knew that pause before her, like I wasn't even worth naming. My hands rested on the edge of the counter, cool against the granite. I let the sting settle before I inhaled. They hadn't forgotten me. They hadn't overlooked me. They had left me out on purpose. I turned slowly, letting my eyes scan the room. Everyone looked the same, warm, comfortable, in sync. I didn't belong here. Not really. I never had. And the worst part, they knew it. And they liked it that way. There wasn't even a plate set for me. I stood at the edge of the dining room, holding my coat awkwardly, like I'd arrived at the wrong address. The table shimmered under dim golden light, linen napkins folded into careful triangles, silverware glinting beside already filled wine glasses. Leftover ham glistened on a serving platter, and the scent of reheated casserole hung in the air, thick and cloying. I reached for a napkin, wiped crumbs off an empty spot at the far end of the table, and pulled a spare chair from the wall. The legs scraped against the hardwood, loud enough to draw a few glances, none of which lasted. I sat down and folded my coat over the back of the chair, smoothing the wrinkles out of habit. No one asked if I wanted anything to drink. No one offered to pass the bread. I looked around for a clean plate and found one sitting alone on the sideboard next to a pie that looked like it hadn't been touched. I brought it back to my seat, filled it quietly with lukewarm food, and took a bite of roast that had gone dry under the heat lamp. Last year, Margaret had looked me in the eye after dessert and said, "You make everything so easy, Lauren. It's like you were made for service." Then she laughed like it was a compliment, like I should have been grateful to be noticed at all. That laugh still echoed somewhere behind my ribs, where old bruises liked to settle. Now, across the table, Sophia leaned toward Naomi, who burst into laughter at something I couldn't hear. The sound was sharp, glassy. Naomi clapped a hand over her mouth, still giggling. Sophia looked over and smirked when our eyes met. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Paul sat 2 seats down, focused on his wine, one hand lightly turning the stem of the glass like it was a puzzle he hadn't quite solved. He hadn't made eye contact with me all evening. I wasn't sure if it was guilt, discomfort, or something worse, indifference. I took another bite. The green beans were cold and undersalted. A few strands of hair stuck to the back of my neck, damp with nervous heat. The room buzzed with a kind of well-fed noise. Cutlery tapping, murmured jokes, inside stories I was no longer inside of. Margaret rose with her wineglass in hand. Her posture was theatrical, chin lifted slightly, smile warm but too polished. "Everyone," she said, loud enough to still the chatter. "Before we move to dessert, I just want to say how grateful we are to Lauren for covering Christmas dinner this year." My fork froze mid-air. The room turned, like a slow-moving tide of expectation. "She's always had such a generous heart," Margaret added, her voice syrupy. "Truly, it means so much." Sophia began to clap, slow, mocking, rhythmic. A few others joined in half-heartedly, unsure whether it was sarcasm or celebration. Naomi raised her glass with an exaggerated flourish. I tried to speak, but nothing came out. My mouth had gone dry like it had filled with sawdust. I hadn't agreed to pay for anything. No one had asked. There was no conversation, no discussion, just this. My hand found the stem of my glass. I lifted it a half-inch off the table, nodded faintly, and set it back down. The clink was barely audible, but inside me, something cracked like porcelain under pressure. They didn't see me, not really. They saw a resource, a convenience, a walking credit card with a nice smile and no boundaries. I looked at their faces, relaxed, satisfied, unaware. They had moved on already, back to jokes and stories, back to their rhythm. The cranberry sauce on my plate had congealed, its sweetness turned sticky and unpleasant. A lipstick-smudged wine glass sat beside mine, someone else's, left behind like I'd been. The hum of the room grew louder, a low swell that pressed against my eardrums. I tried to tune it out, to focus on the food, on anything else, but the truth pulsed through me, steady and sharp. This wasn't forgetfulness. This wasn't social clumsiness. This was intentional. And I was done. I placed my fork down with care. My fingers twitched slightly, but I steadied them. Across the room, Margaret beamed as Sophia poured herself another glass of wine. Paul had disappeared again, maybe into the den, maybe just deeper into silence. Naomi laughed at a joke I hadn't heard. No more, I thought. This is the last time. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to call anyone out. The truth was already sitting there, dressed in gold napkins and cheap red wine, clapping along with a lie. They could keep their roast, their toasts, their perfect little table. I had finally found my boundary. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. All I did was slide the folder onto the table. We were down to the core now. No more cousins, no kids, no Naomi. Just family, the kind of family who had stopped pretending long ago. The dining room still smelled like butter and heat, but the air had thickened. The candles had burned low. The tablecloth bore a constellation of wine drips and crumbs, yet Margaret's lipstick was still perfect. She stood at the head of the table, hands clasped in front of her, posture straight as a news anchor. After some heartfelt discussions, she began, her voice dipped in syrup, "We feel it's best Lauren takes some space from the family, for everyone's peace, including hers." There was no room for questions in her tone, just punctuation. Sophia clapped again, slower this time, theatrical. She leaned back in her chair, wine glass dangling from 2 fingers like a trophy. I didn't say anything. I reached beneath the table, past the linen napkin resting on my lap, and slid the folder onto the center of the table. It landed with a soft sound, almost polite. But the shift in the room was immediate. Chairs creaked. Paul looked up. Margaret blinked. Sophia raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" she asked, already reaching. Her fingers were too quick, too sure. The gesture of someone who's never had to ask permission. She flipped it open with a smirk that wilted by the second page. Venmo receipts, dozens, each one labeled emergency funds. Just until Friday. A car repair, a surprise dentist bill, hundreds then thousands, dates, timestamps. The third page held a copy of a tuition payment from my bank to her university account, a full semester, annotated with an email thread. She had called it a gift at the time. "You're doing better than me, so I thought maybe—" Sophia's face lost color in small patches, like fog crawling over a window pane. She turned the page, then another, then stopped. Paul leaned forward slightly, then sat back again. Margaret's smile remained fixed, but her eyes flickered, quick, assessing, trying to decide whether this was salvageable. I sat still, hands folded in my lap. "I didn't fabricate anything," I said. My voice was steady. "I just organized what you gave me, freely, repeatedly." A hush fell over the table. Even the soft Christmas music humming from the hallway felt wrong now, cheerful and off-key. Sophia looked up sharply. "So what? You've been keeping a file on us?" I didn't answer. The silence was better. The folder sat there like a quiet storm, not violent, just inevitable. Margaret reached for it next, slowly. Her fingers lingered on the tabs. She flipped through the pages with care, but I saw the twitch in her jaw. The smallest betrayal of composure, receipts for house repairs I had paid for when Paul slipped on bills, a handwritten note from her asking for help with one last thing before the bank steps in, canceled checks, annotated transfers. It wasn't just paper. It was a ledger of years. Paul spoke finally. "This seems excessive, Lauren." I turned toward him. "Does it?" He looked down at his plate. Margaret closed the folder and pushed it an inch away, as though its contents might stain the tablecloth. "This feels cruel," she said, her tone softening into that maternal cadence she saved for moments when she needed the room to turn. "What are you trying to do? Shame us?" "No," I said. "I'm trying to stop pretending." The words floated there. Nobody moved. The ceiling fan hummed above, moving stale air in slow circles. Sophia's voice was brittle when it came back. "You've been waiting to use this. That's what this is." "You handed me the pieces," I replied. "I just put them in order." The folder sat in the middle of the table, an unspoken invitation. Margaret glanced at it again, her expression brittle, her fingers twitching as though itching to snatch it up and toss it in the fire. But she didn't. Paul reached for his glass and drank without looking at anyone. I could feel the tremor under my ribs, not fear, not anger, just a shift, like a building settling into its foundation after too many years leaning to one side. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I owed anyone in that room an explanation. Sophia cleared her throat. "What else is in there?" The question came out small, not defiant, not sharp, just wary. I didn't answer. Not yet. Someone laughed too hard. Someone else paused mid-sip. The air shifted, and they all felt it. The folder still sat open on the table, its pages splayed like a wound too wide to close. Nobody reached for dessert. The pecan pie I'd brought earlier, once tucked in so carefully, now sat untouched near the edge of the sideboard. Candles had burned halfway down, casting the room in a soft golden haze that clashed with the tension humming just beneath it. Sophia scoffed, but it came out weaker than before. "Old bills? Really?" she said, flipping another page with forced confidence. Her tone tried to mimic control, but her eyes moved too fast, scanning, calculating. Then her fingers froze. A familiar text, enlarged and printed in bold. Subject line, "Emergency Loan, Startup Fund." The body of the message was longer than I remembered. She must have rewritten history for herself over the years, because the words hit her like a second-hand slap. "I thought we agreed that was personal," she muttered. No one replied. Margaret's gaze flicked to me, then away again. Eric, my cousin, or maybe just another shadow tonight, leaned over to read the page. "Oh, come on," he said. "Everyone borrows money once in a while." But when he reached the section, marked January 2021, gambling transactions, his face lost its casual veneer. He turned the page faster, like flipping past it could undo it. But the receipts were there. Casino names, dollar amounts, dates that overlapped with the week he'd claimed to need rent assistance. "I never said," he began, then stopped. His jaw worked, grinding against a silence that had no room for excuses. From the corner of the table, Dennis, Uncle Dennis, reached for a page near the back. I hadn't expected him to notice that one so soon. He unfolded the paper slowly, his hands steady but his lips pressed into a thin, pale line. "What is this?" he asked. Nobody answered. Margaret shifted in her seat. Dennis looked up, squinting over the top of his glasses. "This is notarized. Who notarized this?" Paul cleared his throat, finally breaking the long quiet he'd been wrapped in for over an hour. "That was," he started, then let the rest die in the air. The document in Dennis's hand was dated 2 years ago. A quiet amendment to a trust fund. The kind of paperwork families bury under shared assumptions and polite forgetfulness. "You told me the trust hadn't been touched," Dennis said, his voice lowering. "You lied." "No one lied," Margaret snapped too quickly. "You lied," Dennis repeated slower now. "To my face, over Easter ham." Chairs creaked. Forks scraped against plates no one intended to finish. The smell of peppermint candles clashed with the sour tang of resentment. Naomi stood suddenly. "I think I'll head out," she said, reaching for her coat. No one tried to stop her. She paused behind Sophia, placed a hand lightly on her shoulder, then leaned in and whispered just loud enough for me to hear. "You're on your own." Then she was gone. The front door opened and clicked shut. Silence pressed back in, heavier this time. Margaret tried to rally. We're letting something small spiral out of proportion. We're family. Sophia gave a short, bitter laugh. Sure we are. Paul looked at me then. Not for long. Just a flicker of eye contact, like he wanted to say something but didn't know where to start. Across the table, Eric's voice rose. This is petty. You brought all this just to make a scene. Still, I said nothing. They weren't really talking to me anymore. They were talking around me, over me, past the folder, pretending they could erase what was now written in black and white. But denial only floats until the weight of truth pulls it under. Dennis pushed the trust amendment forward with 2 fingers. So what else is in there? I looked up. The room was awash in warm lights, red-ribboned garland and frosted windows, a home dressed for joy. And yet the only thing being devoured tonight was each other. I didn't rush. I reached into my bag, the same canvas one I'd carried for years, and pulled out a second envelope. This one was thicker, sealed. I placed it gently next to the folder. This isn't revenge, I said, my voice quiet even. It's inventory. No one moved. The envelope rested there between dessert plates and empty glasses, surrounded by the people who once called themselves my family. Their faces had changed, not with age, but with exposure. They weren't surprised by what they saw. They were surprised I had made it visible. Fork stopped mid-air. Glasses hovered inches from lips. I sat back in my chair, the second envelope untouched before them, and I waited. They thought the first folder was bad. The second one made them stop breathing. Dennis tore open the flap too fast. Pages scattered across the table like autumn leaves in a wind gust. Some fell into an empty serving bowl. One slipped to the floor by Margaret's heels. No one moved to pick it up. The silence that followed wasn't shocked. It was paralyzed. Margaret leaned forward, eyes locked on the paper in Dennis's hand, like she could will it to be something harmless. Paul reached for a sheet that had fluttered toward his plate and read it slowly, lips barely moving. I watched from my seat, hands folded still. My heart wasn't racing. It hadn't since I slid the envelope forward. If anything, I felt something settle. Not satisfaction, not victory. Something quieter, the weight of truth, finally put down. This can't be real, Dennis muttered, scanning the top page. This says you've withdrawn medical consent for all next of kin status, I said evenly. No one in this room can speak for me. Not legally, not in an emergency, not in death. Margaret grabbed a stack of documents, fingers trembling, rifling through them like they might suddenly dissolve. You revoked us as emergency contacts, she asked, voice brittle. As family? You never acted like family, I said. You acted like handlers. Paul cleared his throat, eyes flicking between the pages in my face. But these bank statements, these are from years ago. I know, I replied. That's how long I've been patching your messes. Sophia's tuition, Eric's rehab fund that never went to rehab, the Christmas gift fund that accidentally became a new patio for Margaret. That was for everyone, Margaret snapped too loud. A place to gather, to make memories. I looked at her without blinking, none of which included me. Sophia stood up so quickly her chair skidded. You're unbelievable. Her voice was high, cracked, raw with panic. This is such a stunt. You don't just cut people out because they made a few mistakes. No, I said, but I can stop letting them make them in my name. Dennis rose too, face red, finger jabbing toward Eric. You told me that trust fund never moved. Eric threw his hands up. I didn't know she'd go all CSI on the family finances. Paul leaned forward, voice rising for the first time. You took from the trust, Eric? I wasn't the only one, Eric barked, pointing across the table. Dennis signed off on it. He just didn't expect anyone to find the paper trail. Margaret's hands slammed flat on the table. Enough! But it wasn't. Sophia rounded on Eric. You blamed me for everything, and all this time you were stealing just as much. Eric laughed, dry and mean. At least I didn't pretend I was self-made while living off Lauren's savings. Sophia lunged across the table, knocking over a water glass. It spilled across the envelope, smearing the edge of a notarized release form. Paul stood halfway, unsure if he was breaking up a fight or getting out of the line of fire. Dennis stepped back, hands up like someone was about to pull a gun. Nobody did. But words flew like bullets. Old ones. Sharp ones. You used me. You lied for years. You wanted me gone. You got your wish. And still I sat, calm, centered. The table roared and buckled around me, but I wasn't part of the storm. I was the eye. Margaret turned toward me, eyes glassy. You're tearing this family apart. I stood slowly, folded my napkin, placed it gently next to my plate. Then I looked her dead in the eye. No, I said. You already did. I just stopped patching it together. She flinched, not visibly, but somewhere deep. I could see it. I picked up my coat from the back of my chair. No one tried to stop me. No one asked me to stay. They were too busy unraveling. At the doorway, I turned one last time. Sophia's face was blotchy with rage. Eric had retreated to the sideboard, pouring himself another drink with shaking hands. Dennis stared at a sheet of paper as if it held his obituary. Margaret looked like she might cry, but still hadn't. You wanted me gone, I said, quiet and steady. You just didn't expect I'd take your lies with me. Then I opened the door. Outside, snow had begun to fall, slow and silent like forgiveness. It didn't erase the world. It just covered it for a while in softness, clean, quiet, endless. I walked down the steps, pulled my collar tight, and didn't look back. They taught me silence. I just gave it back, finally on my terms. It was a Tuesday when I walked into the post office in Denver just after lunch. The sky was low and silver, and snow had begun to drift in soft spirals outside. The package in my hand wasn't heavy, but it carried weight all the same. Inside, one notarized statement revoking all emergency contacts. No names listed anymore, just mine. The clerk didn't ask questions. He weighed it, printed the label, slid it into the outgoing bin. I thanked him. Then I stepped back into the cold, pulled my scarf higher, and breathed in the stillness. For weeks, nothing came. No pings on my phone, no letters, just quiet. But not the kind that bruises. This quiet felt earned, chosen. Then the messages began. First, a short text from Margaret. We were angry. That night wasn't our best. You're still family. Then a voicemail. Then 3. Margaret's voice trembling in the third. Don't do this. We can talk. You've made your point. I didn't reply. Then, sometime in late January, the letter came. Pale blue envelope, familiar handwriting, lavender perfume tucked into the creases. Rowena, we made mistakes. We hurt you. I don't know how to undo what was said. But your father misses you. Ellie keeps asking. Please call. Love, Mom. I read it once, folded it back, placed it in a drawer. Some doors stay closed, not out of spite, but because the air behind them can no longer sustain you. But the card? That was different. It arrived in a thick envelope a week later. No return address. Inside, glitter, purple crayon, a little red heart drawn in the corner. 4 words spelled out, crooked and fierce. I miss you, Aunt Lauren. No manipulation, no blame, just Ellie. I sat on the couch holding that card for a long time. Duke nudged my knee gently, his chin warm and heavy. I traced the glitter with my finger. There was a smudge near the bottom, probably hot chocolate or glue. It made me smile. I didn't write back. I didn't call. But I framed it. Placed it on the small bookshelf beside the window, between a candle and a steaming cup of chamomile. This Christmas, I didn't set the table for anyone else. I bought a small artificial tree, strung it with soft white lights, hung one ornament, a brass circle with the word peace engraved in the center. Duke curled beside me on the couch, warm and snoring. Outside, snow drifted across the streetlight like powdered sugar. Inside, the candle flickered low, casting soft shadows on the walls. They had always said I'd be lonely. That cutting family out meant cold dinners and silent holidays. But this silence? This wasn't punishment. It was freedom. And standing at the window, arms folded, tea warming my hands, I whispered it out loud to no one in particular. I'm not broken. I'm not cruel. I'm free. They didn't hear it. They never would. But I did. This isn't a happy ending. It's something better. It's mine. That night, I stood by the window, watching snow settle over quiet streets, Ellie's handmade card glowing softly beside my cup of tea. The silence they once used to punish me had become the gentlest gift I ever gave myself. Sometimes, choosing peace means walking away from the people who taught you to abandon your own needs. And in families, love without respect isn't love, it's debt. When we stop patching over what's broken, we can finally start healing on our own terms. If this story stirred something in you, I invite you to share your thoughts or tell someone your own version of finding peace. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do, for others and for ourselves, is simply to stop pretending.